talk to Joanna Marchong from the Taxpayers Alliance, who's going to chat to us alongside Laurie. Joanna, all the information we have suggests that Labour will be the next government of this country. What do you think is going to happen to taxpayers during that time, Joanna?
It's really hard to answer that question. I think we all have our suspicions, but with every electoral campaign, there's going to be a degree of promises that are being kept. One of the big promises that they've made is that major taxes will not go up. So
Yeah,
that's national insurance.
Just talk us through this. They've talked about income tax, national insurance, and what's the other one?
VAT.
VAT won't rise, but there are still questions on things like capital gains tax, aren't there?
So there's still questions about capital gains tax, and as we all know, it's a tax on investment. So on one hand, it could bring in money, of course, and people can have that freedom. However, it's still a limitation on the investment coming into the UK. We're making our economy more harsh to businesses coming in and people wanting to generate the economy in certain ways. And that's a big issue. But also we saw of yesterday Labour drafting preliminary plans to see if they can enforce a kind of wealth tax. And that's another big problem. We have the top
Essentially,
1%.
I did, in fairness to Labour, I did interview Steve Reid, the Shadow Environment Secretary. I asked him about that exact issue. It was a story in The Guardian yesterday. He said it was rubbish. But there's a very interesting point there, isn't it? In that, as Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, said, we don't know everything Labour is going to do. Not every single thing is in their manifesto. It's a 133-page document. There are quite a lot of pictures and it's quite big text as well. There's a lot more decisions they're going to have to make, Laurie, aren't there?
Look, if you rule out income tax and national insurance and VAT, that's about 66% of the tax take.
Okay.
It doesn't leave you a whole lot more to tinker with. Capital gains, Rachel Reeves has left that open. No immediate plans to look at council tax, re-rating council tax. But that doesn't give you a whole lot of revenue raising.
But if they did re-rate council tax, that would be a massive change. I mean, that hasn't been done since 1991.
Yeah, and I hope we get time to talk about that, because funding for local authorities, you and I have batted that one around before, what we're going to do about that.
Well, talk about it now. Tell us what you think should happen or what needs to happen.
Well, look, if we talk about not raising taxes, right, and this is what the parties are saying, right, and this is false. We all know it's false. We're all being taken for fools. I've worked in a lot of places. I had never worked somewhere where there's so much economic literacy as in the UK. When we have a budget, it's front page news. Everyone knows what's expected. People know what they're doing here. They know this can't possibly happen. Right? You cannot have public services without a higher level of spending. No one's talking about local authorities. No one's talking about social care, which will continue to be a really big drag on these local authorities, which are largely funded by the central government.
Well, let's ask Joanna about that, because really everything that Keir Starmer wants to do will involve more taxation. You can talk about reform, reform of public services rather than the political party. You can talk about reform of public services, but that takes time, certainly. I think it's well overdue. But really, it seems to me that there are lots of things, the general nature of a Starmer administration would require tax rises.
So it's very smart what Keir Starmer is trying to do here. If you take the headlining tax that he's imposing, so the private school tax, when we see this, he says that we're going to raise about £1.6 billion alone. However, he doesn't talk about the fact that there might be fallout, students having to go into state schools. That could be up to 200,000 students.
In fairness to Labour, they do say that that's priced in and this is fully costed.
Right, of course. But whether it's fully costed or not, there are already issues in the state school system. We don't have enough teachers, don't have enough resources. The buildings are crumbling. Like, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. So if we have the intake that we have now, plus the up to 200,000 more people, then there's going to be major reforms that need to be done, not only in price-wise, but also can you really expect them to have costed it properly when things like crumbling school buildings crop up on the fly. Like these things just happen haphazardly.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. And school maintenance is a very big issue. What about Laurie's point there on social care, on the big sort of? I mean, nobody's talking about social care in this country. I remember a senior person in the NHS said to me a few years ago, the NHS is on its knees, but social care has fallen over. From the Taxpayers Alliance point of view, would you be happy with a taxation being used on that, or taxes rising to pay for that? Or, I mean, you presumably think taxes are far too high already?
Well, I think taxes are far too high, but I also think how we're spending it isn't worthwhile whatsoever. We're not seeing money go where it should be going, and we see lots of frivolous spending and lots of avenues where money is being wasted or it's going into a black hole. In terms of the NHS, it's a big issue. There needs to be some kind of reform or some kind of overhaul of the whole system. I think the closest we've gotten to kind of concrete plans is probably the Liberal Democrat manifesto, where he's talking about free personal care for all people. And again, when we go back to the idea of taxes and what they're promising, their budget for this personal care is 8 billion. Now they've said that they're going to raise about 5 billion from capital gains tax and another 3 billion in other areas, but that doesn't leave room for where they're going to have money for their other pledges, like the £2 increase to the minimum wage.
Okay.
It's a lot of, in this election, it's a lot of people throwing ideas out and throwing promises out without having solid backing.
That is a good point from Joanna, isn't it? Because we keep hearing, Laurie, this is costed. Well, you know, my new Lamborghini is costed £250,000, but me buying it is another matter.
Absolutely. And look, again, they're trying to pull the wool over our eyes. And Joanna, you said something that I think is really important, and that is frivolous spending and frivolous spending promises. We're not seeing any sort of promises to spend on investment. And I think there's a real...
What do you mean by that, spending on investment?
Spending on long-term things, spending on infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Can people get to where they want to go, where they want to live and work? Or is there traffic? Are the trains not running? The state of schools, adult education. There is a big, companies say there's a big mismatch between the skill set that they're seeing with applicants and the skills that they need. Hospitals, these are things that need investment. They need long-term investment.
And those 40 hospitals that the Conservatives plan don't seem to have cropped up. Joanna Marchong from Taxpayers Alliance, thank you. We'll leave it with you. For the meantime, appreciate your contribution to the programme.